Most people have one category of human being they cannot stand. Not someone specific, a type. The person who always makes it about themselves. The one who performs virtue in every room they enter. The one who cannot admit they are wrong. The one who takes up too much space or too little or the wrong kind of space. The reaction to this type is distinctive. It arrives faster than thinking. It feels more certain than most things you believe. It comes with an odd undertow, not just a negative feeling, but something close to satisfaction, a sense of rightness. Like the contempt itself is evidence of something, a standard being upheld, a line correctly drawn. The strange thing is that what you find intolerable in other people is rarely a rare thing. It finds you. The type appears with surprising regularity. The feeling it generates does not diminish with familiarity. If anything, it sharpens. Most people do not examine this too closely. The contempt feels self-explanatory. The problem is obviously the other person. There is an older idea, much older than therapy, older than psychology as a discipline, that says this is the wrong direction to look. In the autumn of 1885, a writer named Robert Louis Stevenson was ill in bed in Bournemouth with a hemorrhage from his lungs. He was broke, exhausted, and had been trying unsuccessfully for months to write the kind of commercially viable story that might keep him solvent. He fell asleep one night and dreamed something. He dreamed of a man pursued by a mob for a terrible crime, who ducked into a doorway and swallowed the powder, and changed. He woke up and wrote for 3 days almost without stopping. His wife, Fanny, read the manuscript when he was finished and told him he'd gotten it wrong, that he'd written a straightforward horror story when the material was something more like a parable. He burned the first draft and rewrote it in 6 days while still ill. The story that came from a fever dream written by a sick man in 6 days went on to become one of the most widely read psychological documents in the English language. Not because of the horror, because it was accurate. The doctor at the center of the story is a man of exceptional virtue. Henry Jekyll is respected, philanthropic, controlled, and a pillar of Victorian society. His life is a model of discipline. He has spent decades constructing a self that is above reproach, rational, civilized, good. There is nothing visibly wrong with him. There is also a locked laboratory at the back of his house and an experiment he cannot stop running. Jekyll's argument to himself, the one that justifies the experiment, is that he is simply honest about something everyone else pretends isn't there, that human beings contain contradictions, that the respectable person and the creature of appetite are always in the same body. His formula is a way of separating them cleanly, of being good completely and bad completely at different times. No hypocrisy, no contradiction, just two separate inhabitants of the same form. The first transformation is not described as horror. It is described as liberation. When Hyde appears for the first time, Jekyll experiences something he hasn't felt in years. A lightness, an absence of weight, the particular freedom of a person who has stopped performing. He goes out, he is reckless. He does things he would not permit himself. He returns. The formula reverses the change. He is Jekyll again, respectable, intact, and quietly electrified by what just happened. He goes back the following night. Hyde grew more confident with each visit, more particular in his cruelties, less careful about witnesses. On a foggy night in London, he encountered a small girl running around a corner and simply walked over her. Not from malice exactly, but from a complete indifference to her existence. The child screamed. A crowd gathered. Hyde was cornered and only under social pressure agreed to compensate the family. He unlocked the laboratory door, produced a check drawn on Jekyll's account, and disappeared inside. Jekyll's attempts to stop became increasingly desperate. He resolved several times, with complete sincerity, that the experiment was finished. He went months without transformation. He believed the discipline was holding, and then sitting on a park bench in Regent's Park on a spring afternoon, he felt himself change without the formula. The transitions began arriving uninvited. Hyde murdered a member of Parliament with a cane in a street for no reason that could be reconstructed afterwards. The formula that reversed the change began to fail. Jekyll's handwriting started to drift towards Hyde's. The laboratory stock of a particular chemical ran low, and the replacement supply was subtly different, impure in some way that prevented the reversal working properly. Jekyll wrote a confession. He sealed it. He sent it to his lawyer with instructions. Then Hyde took over completely. The obvious reading writes itself. A man cannot live a double life indefinitely. Repression is compression. What you suppress, you don't eliminate, you energize. The shadow grows stronger when it is denied. The darker impulses that Jekyll refused to acknowledge within his ordinary life were not destroyed by being locked away. They accumulated. They took on a shape of their own. When the formula failed, what had been compressed was still there, larger and less manageable than when it started. This is the self-help version of the story. Look at your darkness, acknowledge it, integrate it. Do not push it into a laboratory at the back of your mind and pretend it isn't there. The consequences of denial are the story's lesson. It's not wrong. It's just not the whole thing. Jekyll was not destroyed by his vices. He was destroyed by his virtues. This is the part of the story that the popular reading tends to pass over. Hyde is not what Jekyll secretly wanted to be. Hyde is what Jekyll's respectability required. The more completely Jekyll embodied the Victorian ideal, rational, controlled, above reproach, free of appetite and contradiction, the more completely everything that didn't fit that ideal was pushed into the dark laboratory. Hyde wasn't the repressed content. He was the structural complement of the persona. He grew in exact proportion to the perfection of Jekyll's public character. If Jekyll had been slightly less virtuous, slightly more honest about his appetites, slightly more willing to admit his contradictions, slightly less committed to the performance of respectability, Hyde would have had less to be made of. The shadow is not your darkness. The shadow is everything that didn't make it into who you decided to be. It contains what the persona excluded. And the persona excluded not only the vicious and the shameful, but anything that doesn't fit the identity you've chosen to inhabit. The tenderness you couldn't afford to show, the ambition you were taught to find distasteful, the anger that didn't match the person you were supposed to be. The person who decided to be endlessly patient will have impatience in the shadow. The person who decided to be strong will have vulnerability there. The saint's shadow contains things the saint would find unrecognizable. It grows as you grow. This is the piece the self-help version consistently misses. Every new layer of self-awareness creates a new edge where more material gets sorted into acceptable and not. The more developed your identity, the larger the shadow it requires. You do not shrink your shadow by becoming a better person. You make it more sophisticated. And you encounter it, not usually by introspection, by projection. The material you cannot integrate becomes a lens. It finds its expression in what you see in other people. The person who makes you feel too large a reaction, the type you cannot stand, the contempt that arrives before the thinking, is almost always carrying something you have refused to own. The intensity of the reaction is the measure of the shadow's pressure. You are not judging them, you are recognizing something. The recognition is arriving from very far inside, through a channel that bypasses the ordinary filtering of the conscious mind. This is not a comfortable idea. It's not meant to be. The self-help version of the shadow invites you to look at your darkness with acceptance and compassion and grow. The older version, the one Stevenson dreamed in a fever and couldn't stop writing until it was finished, says something harder. The material you would most like to disown is usually not what you think it is. And the place you're most likely to find it is not inside yourself, in the private confessional of a journal. It's in the face of the person you find it most impossible to tolerate. You will not finish this encounter. This is worth saying plainly. The shadow is not a project with a completion date. There is no final integration. No moment at which you have looked at everything the persona excluded and made it conscious and become whole. Jung was clear about that, and it's not the part of his work that tends to get quoted on social media. The self is not something you complete. The encounter with the shadow is not something you finish. It is something you remain in a relationship with. A recurring, humbling confrontation of the gap between who you have decided to be and everything that decision left behind. This is not bad news exactly. It is structural news. It changes the question from how do I integrate my shadow, which implies an endpoint, a practice, a progress you can log, to something more honest. What is the contempt showing me right now? Not as a demand for immediate self-knowledge, not as an instruction to be ashamed of the feeling, but as a question you are willing to stay with a little longer before resolving. Stevenson dreamed of a man swallowing a powder and becoming something that couldn't be put back in the bottle. He wrote the story in 6 days, sick, with no plan, following something his conscious mind didn't fully understand. The story has been in print for nearly 140 years, in over 50 languages, adapted more times than anyone has bothered to count. Not because it's a horror story, because it's a description of something people recognize from the inside. The laboratory is always at the back of the house. The question is not whether to acknowledge it. It's whether you are willing to notice who you become when you talk about the people you find it impossible to tolerate, and to let that noticing be the beginning of something rather than the end.